Let's say a quick word of prayer. We're going to fly through some announcements and get into the topic of the evening. Lord, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for everyone who has come together to share, to wrestle with ideas, to ask big questions, to wonder, and to just be in wonder of you. I pray, God, that you will be with us in this time that we have. I think of those that would like to be here who have, for all sorts of reasons, no ability to be here. I pray that you will be with them. I think of those that might come later to look at the study once it's posted online. And I pray, God, that you will also be with them in their times of thinking and wrestling with a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. Be with us now. Open our hearts, our minds, and our ears to what you would have us hear. And we will thank you and give you praise always. Amen. Sunday morning at Pilgrim, I'm going to flip through these because you see them all the time. Sunday morning at Pilgrim at 10 a.m. Next week, we start a new series. You'll get a new Zoom link for this. But this is our Just Living series. Shay and I spent a big chunk of time on Tuesday kind of outlining this. Each week, we're going to look at one of these topics. And the way we're going to do it, we kept playing with this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden, this is always the way it works. And I always like the way it works whenever Shay and I are trying to develop curriculum for these studies. All of a sudden, it was like, oh, there it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these topics, and we're going to look at a parable that Jesus tells that would be relative to that topic. So a parable about morality or mercy or forgiveness, those things. But then we're also going to look at not just a teaching in the parable, but also an example from Jesus's ministry and life. So it's not just here's the story, but here's how it plays out in Jesus's own life. And so we're going to try to put a nice little fancy bow around some of these ideas. They're big topics. And so we're going to see what we can learn from the master. And so that's going to be how we're going to be approaching this beginning next week with our first topic about morality. So I will send out a new, as I always do, but keep your eye out for an email that will have the new link. Shannon, I don't know that I've got your email, so I may need to get that from you. You can either put it in the text here if you're comfortable doing that, or even Facebook at my inbox, or email me somehow or other. But if I can just get your email, I'll make sure that you're on that list. On July 26th, that's just in a couple weeks, is our next online service. I was telling folks early on that I sent the link to my home church pastor, Joy Douglas Strom at Lakeview Presbyterian, because we were having this conversation about how do you keep church going in the time of COVID when it's online. And I said, well, we do it a little differently. We're just a kind of a little different way of approaching it. And she goes, oh, let me see what you're doing. And now she wants all our secrets. It's like, how do you get that choir to sing? How do you get all these people? So she was just really, really, she was moved by it, by the Pride service. And she was just really blessed. And so I went back to look at it and noticed that there have been over 100 views of the service. And so that's a beautiful thing. We are, what we want to be happening is happening. And so we're grateful for that. And that is that people are finding us, and hopefully they're being touched and their lives are being blessed by the work that we're doing. So I want to encourage you all to participate in every way you can. I sent out the directions earlier this week. I hope you all got them. But there are 3 pieces. There is the piece of Wild Things, which I need everyone to do a reading of. And we're going to turn this into a choral reading, which is lovely. And then we're doing a wonderful communion pass along, which I'm just going to demonstrate now. I'm not going to take you through the video like I did last week, but it is you start with the glass out here, out of the frame of the video you shoot. Then you bring it in. You have a bread. You dip the bread. You take the bread. If you want to sip, take a sip. But we want to have a clear glass with a wine or juice in it. A clear glass is the thing so we can see the wine and juice. Sip, eat. If you want to sip, do that. Take it, and then take it and pass it on out of the frame. And it's going to be, and what we're going to do is when we edit it together, it's going to be movie magic. It's going to look like we're all sharing. Bill and Jane Ann already sent in theirs. I've already got John Reese's, so people are starting to send these in, and it's going to be just a really beautiful time together. And a wonderful way of sharing as best we can in these conditions. Amen?
No,
Are you sharing by your left hand?
yes.
You
I
start
thought
with
we
the
were
left
Oh,
hand?
I'm sorry. It's your right hand. Forgive me. It's your right hand. Thank you. I always get it backwards. It's your right hand in. There you go. Thank you. And then your left out. Whew, thanks for correcting me. And then the last thing is we will all our praise and worship song is an Israel Houghton really little up-tempo number called Turn It Around. We just got the music from Russell that we will be using, and there's the praise and worship team are recording that. But meanwhile, I'm going to send that out tomorrow. You'll get the version that we're doing. If anybody that wants to sing along, just sing along. Don't worry about your parts. Don't worry about how good it sounds. It's us. And because we are wonderful and we are beautifully and wonderfully made, the music will be beautiful and wonderful, just by caveat of that. Amen. So that's what we want to do with that. It's just always a joy to see you all come in and sing and be part of all of this. This is our final week in this series. And as you know, we are shaking the trees because there are snakes and things that will bite you up in those trees. And what we want to do is get to the rich fruit. And that's what the whole idea is tonight. And tonight we are looking at this topic, afterlife. I'm going to thank my good friend Lisa for this one. And it's been a real wonderful experience for me to dig into a lot of this. It gets really heady really, really quick. So we're going to just kind of go back and kind of retrace our steps in a minute and kind of think about things. And I've got a question that I want to ask everybody. And so Joycelyn, I'm going to ask you to open up the mic so people can just talk as they need to.
They can open it themselves.
Okay, yeah, just open when you get ready. My question is, how old were you, or think for a second, what were your first memories of knowing about heaven and hell? How did you find out about heaven and hell, and how old were you? Take a pot shot even at it.
I think I was like 10.
10, okay.
And my father, he was the one that baptized me because he was, a minister.
So, a minister.
Early in life, I knew about heaven.
Heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Somebody else?
I was 4 or 5.
4 or 5. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm sure I knew about it from first grade because I went to Catholic school.
There you go. Okay.
Probably
hey, Bobby.
5.
I'm sorry?
Probably 5.
Probably 5. Yeah.
Church at Sunday school. I went to like a real tiny country church that was very charismatic. We were born again.
Born again. So you got to know about heaven and hell if we're going to get you born again, right?
That's right.
That's right.
Well, we weren't supposed to use the word hell.
Okay.
So didn't really think about it much. We were supposed not to use that. That was a bad word. And I think it was people outside our family who brought the concept to us. It wasn't people inside the family. But of course, we thought about heaven because it was in a lot of the hymns. Yes. So you had to think about heaven. I don't think hell was in our hymns much. I'd have to scout through them. But it became an intellectual concept, not something that had anything to do with us. That is hell.
That's interesting because I probably by about 6 or 7 went across the street to my good Catholic neighbor and everything. I think it was that's right, because she would always want to know about my grades and pray about my grades and praise me about my grades. And I remember her criticizing her son for did something wrong, and you're going to go to hell for that.
Okay.
I didn't know what I meant.
Yeah. And see, here's the thing, and that's what I want to get to, is that a lot of us experience this teaching of heaven and hell kind of as a carrot and a stick kind of thing, right? It's like all good children go to heaven and all bad people go to hell, right? When Shay and I were talking about this whole idea. I told him that when I was in first grade, I went to an evangelical private school, right? And we were first and second grade together, and then third and fourth grade were together in a class. And first and second grade went out for a recess for 15 minutes, and then we would go line up, and the third and fourth graders would come out. And this kid, Wesley, I don't know where Wesley is today. He hasn't shown up on Facebook or anything, but Wesley was sort of always the troublemaker. And Wesley went running around and told us all that our teacher, Miss Johns, had locked her keys in the classroom and we couldn't get back in. So recess had been extended and we were going to be able to play outside with the third and fourth graders. And that was even, with the big kids, and we were getting an extra 15 minutes of play and we all just scattered back out into the yard and off we went. And then the bell rang for that recess to be over and we lined up and there was Mrs. Johns just standing and she was not at all pleased. So we went into the class and she wanted to know what made us think that we could stay out for an extra 15 minutes. And we realized that she was really unhappy and none of us wanted to say anything. And so we just sort of kept our heads down. And she said something I will never forget. I don't remember one thing that woman had taught me academically. I remember this moment. This is all I remember of her. She said, that if you did it and you didn't do it, then you're lying. And you know what the Bible says, all liars have their place in the lake of fire that never goes out. This was going to be a heaven and hell moment for staying out for 15 minutes of extra recess. And you know what we all did? Every last one of us decided we would take the blame just to make sure we didn't go to heaven in case we might be mistaken. And all of a sudden, it was like a Spartacus moment. We all just put our hands up. I guess I did it. There's a weirdness that comes very early in life in Christian cultures, and particularly American Christian cultures. Chris, I don't know if this checks out with your experience growing up, how quickly people reach for heaven and hell. But when you grow up in a religious household in America, sooner or later, that threat of heaven or hell figures it into your sort of behavioral modification program. Somehow or another, the idea that if you sass your mother, you're going to go to hell. If you take that comic book that doesn't belong to you, you're going to go to hell. It begins to creep up. And if not in your own home, I'm always heartened when I hear that people weren't raised in that. I was raised in one of those kind of homes. You get around kids, right? They're the neighbor kids or the Catholic lady, right? There's always somebody around who begins to present this. And consequently, we sort of get, what's the word I want? We get thwarted, or we get stunted is the word I'm thinking of. We sort of get stunted in our imaginations and in our way of understanding what this all means, because we sort of just get stuck to heaven is for good people and hell is for bad people, and that's the way it works. And my big goal in life is to try to stay out of the bad people. I don't want to go to hell, so I got to try to do everything to go to heaven. And we never really explore what these ideas are, where they come from, or what they might mean. And so tonight, that's what we're going to do. I don't know that I'm going to answer all of the questions. I don't think that we can answer all of the questions, but we're going to look at it and see what we can shake out of it. Is that fair? Now, when I was a kid, I confused all of this. I kind of conflated it with the Wizard of Oz. This was my own problem. In my head, heaven had to be the Emerald City. And I just thought when I died, I was going to get to hang out with Dorothy and Toto, and that was fine by me. I was good with it because it just was a good old time for me. And I was ready to go to heaven. And I actually told that to my Sunday school teacher, who was so alarmed that she went and told my parents, who were the pastors. Tim says he's going to the Emerald City. He's not going to heaven. And I was determined that that's where I was going. I also sort of understood hell as sort of like the Wicked Witch's castle, where all sorts of evil things happened and where there was this awful figure that sent all these evil things into the world. And the problem with that was that I had maybe had too much exposure to too few scriptures about heaven and hell, because look at these texts. if you read this, this could be Oz. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared, and so had the sea. And then I saw New Jerusalem, that holy city coming down from God in heaven. The wall was built of jasper, and the city was made of pure gold, clear as crystal. Each of the 12 gates was a solid pearl. The streets of the city were made of pure gold, clear as crystal. That's the only thing I could equate that with, was the Emerald City. And then you look at the other side, and all of a sudden it was, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he or she was thrown into the lake of fire. And so it was like, well, that's the terrible place. That's the terrible place. And so I had this kind of strange sensibility about heaven and hell. And to this day, I'm not going to lie, to this day, sometimes when heaven crosses my mind, I hear those optimistic voices. Do you know what I'm talking about in The Wizard of Oz? Those really, they're coming out of the poppy field. It's like, you're out of the dark, you're out of the night, you're out of the... I hear those voices. It's like, that must be what heaven is. I think that all of our faith ancestors would be having a nightmare right about now if they knew that that's what the way that we think about it. But when we are presented with these ideas at such an early age, we get into the problem. What our faith ancestors told us was that almost all of this is sort of beyond our knowledge. Paul keeps hitting this note over and over again. He says in 1 Corinthians, he quotes Isaiah, where it says, God has prepared things for those who love God, so that no eye has seen or ear heard, or they haven't even entered or crossed the mind of any human being. And so when we start to think about what is on the other side, Paul's saying, as best an idea, get the best idea you can. Just know that it's not going to be the right idea. You're not going to be able to pull all this together. And then at the end of the famous love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13, he sort of changes the topic. And he starts talking about what's beyond loving. And he says, when I was a child, yeah, I used to speak like a child, and I reasoned like a child, and I thought like a child. But now that I've become a man, I've put an end to childish things. Okay. But then what he does is he takes that and says, so as an adult, I recognize something. We don't know it all. We will never figure it out. Now we just see a reflection in a mirror. Then when we come into the fullness, in the full presence of God, now we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but eventually I will know completely. He's talking about the moment when we are fully reunited, whenever we are reunited with God, which in his mind is heaven. Another place, and you'll see this later, to be absent from our bodies is what? To be present with God. And so in Paul's mind, this thing is too big to even try to reason it out. Just let it be so grand that you know it's grander than you can think. And then let it go. Because otherwise you're going to get yourself into a world of trouble because you don't have the full capability of understanding or knowing it. Now, the early Christians embraced this idea, and their ideas were really radical for a lot of reasons. Oh, I got to go back. And the first one was that everyone else in ancient culture, their gods were gods that had to be appeased. You always worried about whether or not you had displeased this God, right? Oh, forgive me with this. That you had displeased God, and they blamed all sorts of natural phenomena, personal misfortune, all of those misfortunes in life on the fact that they had not appeased their gods. That's why there were all of these elaborate sacrifices. That's why the idolatry would get really, really ornate, was there were all of these rites and rituals that were constructed as a means of appeasing these gods. In ancient Rome, there was among the patrician society, when you go to Rome and you go to the Palatine, where all of the muckety-mucks live, the Beverly Hills of ancient Rome. When you go there, there's a temple stuck over in the far right corner where the most patrician, most powerful men in Rome would go for these really ornate rituals to abase themselves in front of this goddess, so she would be appeased and they would be able to remain in power. And they would do things like one of the rites that happened in that temple is there was a big basin. They would climb down in that basin and they would slaughter an ox on top of it, and so that the blood and the guts of the ox would come down and just totally humiliate these men. And there were all these ways that they would sort of subject themselves to humiliation as a way of showing this god how earnest they were in wanting to please her. That was the culture that Christianity rises up in. And Christianity comes up with this radical idea and says, it's not about wrath, y'all. This is about mercy. And it's not about, punishment and death and pain and suffering. It's about new life. And they put a big flag on this and called it grace. And this was a radical idea. A God of grace, a God who loves everyone equally, a God who is so extended in God's own love for God's creation that this is a God that heals. This is a God that saves. This is a God that corrects. And so this becomes a radical idea, and it's an idea that upsets a lot of people. Just like some folks, well, here we go again. Some folks would be upset with some of the stuff we'll talk about tonight, because some folks there are plenty of Christians that still have a God that they think needs to be appeased. Have you known any of those Christians? God is always out to get them. God's watching you. One of the things I grew up with, some of you may have grown up with, there was the all-seeing eyes of Jesus are watching you. We were singing this song in children's church, like Jesus was like the ultimate CCTV, just wherever you went, there was the Jesus cam. It was always on, always watching what you were doing, There are people that try to turn, and these instincts to have a God that must be appeased are ancient. They're just drilled into our humanity. And so the radical idea is, no, that's not who God is, y'all. God is different. So this is a God of unconditional love and acceptance, this God of grace. This is not a God who operates on a merit system and punishes those that don't live up to this God's expectations. This is why we read some of the stuff that's in the Sermon on the Mount and we just glaze right over it. Oh, it makes total sense. But some of the stuff that Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount must have made people's hair fall out. One place Jesus says, well, look, y'all, you know what? It rains on the just and the unjust, and the sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous. There is God. This is not a God who plays favorites, who only likes people that earn God's favor. This is a God of unconditional love. God favors everyone. God's blessings fall on everyone. And so these become these radical ideas that become the foundation of, we're going to get to heaven and hell, bear with me, but these are the ideas and the context in which this comes in. So when Jesus is teaching all of this, he refers from time to time to various states of an afterlife, and there are sort of three concepts of hell that are active in Jesus's day, and he refers to all of them in different ways. From his own Jewish tradition, there are sort of two ideas. The first one is a place called Sheol. Sheol is a place of death. In Judaism, it is not a punishment. It's more just sort of like a place of just darkness and stillness. When you read the ancients talking about Sheol, they're often talking about how dusty it is there. It's just sort of this place that is just there. And this is where the dead folks go while they're waiting for a resurrection. There's also a place that Jesus talks about. He mentions it 12 different times in the Gospels, a place called Gehenna. And this is actually a referral to a valley outside of Jerusalem, Hinnom. And this place was always, first of all, it has a bad reputation. It begins with a bad reputation, this valley outside of Jerusalem, because it is said that this is the place where wayward Israelite kings back many centuries before actually sacrificed their children to idols, so to the god Moloch. And so this place in Jewish lore is already a contaminated place. But it also becomes a place where people just take all of their rubbish, including their dead. and they burn their rubbish, and it's also a place of cremation. So this place is always kind of on fire, Gehenna. It's a terrible place where if you go there, you're going there because somebody's dead, or you're losing something, or you're getting rid of something. It is not a place at all thought to be healthy. And so Jesus quite often will talk about people who are they don't do what's right, and so they are thrown into Gehenna. That is the kind of statement in Jesus's day that would be comparable to us talking about folks going to hell in a handbasket. It's that kind of quick reach. And I want us to be very clear about what that is. This is not Jesus making some big doctrinal statement. He's just saying, this is, it might as well just go ahead and just burn right up, because this person has wasted his or her situation. This is what it is. And then the final thing, Jesus also talks about the Hellenistic idea of Hades and Tartarus. Hades being a place of forgetfulness. When you go to Hades, you don't remember your life and you are no longer remembered. It's sort of a version of Sheol. They are very closely related. But then beneath it, there's an even lower pit of deeper darkness called Tartarus, where if you were evil, that would be where you would be forgotten and relegated to. So these ideas all kind of spin off of one another in the culture. Kind of like in our culture, let's take the other extreme. In our culture, we will talk about heaven and we will talk about nirvana, right? And because even if we're not Buddhist, we'll still talk about nirvana because we understand what nirvana means. And so that's kind of the way this cross-cultural talk is happening in Jesus's day. And he uses all the different terms for this in the context of talking about people who have lost their opportunities, or people who have not been accountable or not done good. And so as a result of this, the reward for what they're getting is either being forgotten or being thrown away in a trash pile. Gehenna. Now, heaven in Jesus's day also kind of comes in interesting ways. There is heaven. And when the ancients, particularly ancient Jews, talked about heaven, they literally meant heaven up here, the sky, up above, the place where only God lives, God and God's angels live, a place that humans can never achieve. And so heaven is this glorious place that is just to be looked at and marveled at. But then there is also this place that is common in ancient Jewish tradition called Abraham's bosom. And what Abraham's bosom is sort of like in Jewish sort of understanding, it is a place in Hades or in Sheol where people go where they have had their lives have not been easy. And this is a place where even though they are dead and they really don't know anything and there's not really much going on, they're just in this sort of holding place, they're given some respite. And then finally, there's paradise. And in the theology of Jesus's day, paradise is the restored world, the place, the perfect place. This is Eden redux, Eden revisited. So when Jesus says to the thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise, he's saying we are leaving this chaos, this injustice, this violence, all that the filth that we are looking at, and we are going to a place where kindness and perfection will be restored. And so these are ideas. These are big ideas. Now, yes?
Sorry, you mentioned heaven, and under the sort of Jewish conception, was a place that humans could not achieve or obtain. So
yes.
That's even in the afterlife?
So Jews, until it was many centuries before Jews even really thought about an afterlife. Even in Jesus's day, there's a lot of controversy about, is there a resurrection or an afterlife at all? What happens is when you die, you just sort of go into this place of shadows, this world of shadows called Sheol. Heaven is where God lives in early Judaism.
Paradise is what we aspire to.
It's what we aspire to because we were in paradise, and so it's a return to paradise.
So that in the afterlife, in this Jewish vision, we are not with God in the afterlife.
God is with us, but we are not where God is. You see what I'm saying? There is the God is up in heaven, and this is angels and all of that up there, you know. And there are all these questions, like in Psalms, it's like, who can ascend to the place of the Lord? Who can who can arise to God's holy hill, you know? And it says only those that have clean hands. You know, there's this idea of aspiration to go there. But the idea is that heaven is a big reach. And so that's why the ascension in the Jesus story is so vital, and why there's so much of this sort of vertical understanding of how Jesus is connected to God as in a vertical way. Because Jewish thought is like, that's where the Most High lives, and they would call God the Most High. And so they're just sort of these interesting ideas. Overall, though, the afterlife in ancient thought is an afterthought. You don't join the church to go to heaven. You know, you don't go to temple so you can go to heaven. You don't do these things. You don't live right to avoid going to hell. There's an ethical component that gets lost whenever your life and your spirituality is mandated by an attempt to try to escape hell or get into heaven. I have a problem with that. There's a little bit of a, there's a little bit, I got my ticket kind of thing, you know? And that's not in ancient thought, in the thought of Jesus's time, the focus was in this life, on the present. And then what is the challenges in this life? Two major things: mortality, which was ever so real, because obviously they weren't able to live as long as we are able to live, and also just overall vulnerability. There's physical vulnerability, political vulnerability, all of those, you know, one day your country is there and the next day it's gone. And so there's a sense of vulnerability. And consequently, that's why when we read the Gospels and when we read the epistles, they keep coming back to this idea of freedom, of being free from concerns of mortality and vulnerability, of being free of all of the constraints of the moment. That's why Jesus famously says, look, you're truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teaching, if you honor the ethics, if in this moment you are upright, then you will what? Know the truth, and the truth will do what? The outcome is always, you will be set free. There's later on, he goes, the Son, he who the Son sets free is what? Free indeed. And so there's always this, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And I know we've been talking a lot about freedom, but that gets lost in a lot of Christian constructs in our time. And I don't want to pick on the Catholics and the evangelicals, but I will, because they both are big incentive people. They are all about the heavenly incentive or the get out of hell free card, right? And in the middle of it, the present gets lost. If everything that you're doing all the time is against that moment when you die, what are you missing, right? Are you remaining faithful to Christ's teachings? Are you living truthfully in your truth? And when you do that, then that's how you find yourself and you become free. I don't know if Dana's on or not. She may not be on tonight. Dana and I were laughing because I had my buddy Walt Whitman over. Walt is, some of you may know him. He directs the Soul Children of Chicago. You may have seen him. They always sing wherever Michelle Obama is. She loves the Soul Children. And so I'm always teasing him that he's running off with the First Lady. But he's always tied up with Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey. Those are his two big champions. And Walt was just over one night, and Dana lives in our building, and she just came up. And Walt and I were tickling her with how in Black church, you grow up with this, and Pentecostal churches, you grow up with this call and response thing that happens. It's really cool. And so you learn all these, somebody says, I'm a soldier, and the rest of the church right away says, in the army of the Lord. I'm a soldier in the army. You know, there are all these calls and responses, and you just know them. God's not dead. He's yet alive. God's not, you just learn all these things, and they just go back and forth. And so we were saying some of them get really silly. And they're just, we don't know who invented them, but some of them, and the one that always cracked, and Dana to this day, that might have been 10 years ago that we had this conversation. Dana still reminds me of it, where Walt said he was in a church and some person got up and said, hell is a hot place. And the whole church answered back, ain't no water there. And that's just, hell is a hot place, ain't no water there. Hell is a hot place, ain't no water there. What is that? What does that do? You know, all that does is remind you that you're going to get in trouble. You know, that is not freeing. That is not liberating. That is not the purpose of the gospel. What happens, and then what happens along the way, though, we didn't come here without any help. In Christian history, it begins in a very certain kind of way, and it just continues to develop. Early Christians sort of reflected the Greco-Roman idea of Hades. When they talked about heaven and hell, they really talked about it as sort of a passageway. You were moving, after you died, you moved through something as a way of purification, of being reunited with God. And bliss would be being reunited with your maker. This is why to be absent with the body is to be present with the Lord. This is the big idea. So they would think of hell as just this passageway. And there were some early thoughts about it that were interesting. They were, one of the ideas is the reason, and some of it's just people trying to work stuff out. Some of it's kind of charming. I'm most charmed by this idea that a passage through hell, there's an early Christian apologist who writes that passing through hell, you come into the presence of God, which is so bright, it's like fire. And the brilliance of God is so hot and so brilliant that that's what burns away your impurities so that you're able to totally come in pure before God's presence. That was an idea. There were all of these ideas, but nobody had any lock on it. And Christianity was not working. They were not having big meetings. There weren't big councils to figure out the heaven and hell thing. They had bigger things to fry. And so it was always sort of thought, hell was sort of thought of, well, this is kind of an experience you go through. You go through hell to get to learn something or be purified. And then about the 5th century, it gets a little more concrete. And all of a sudden we start thinking about, well, maybe you don't ever get out. What happens if you go to hell and you don't ever get out? And there's this Gospel of Nicodemus that gets on the loose. It's a Christian bestseller. And it is all about an imagination of what it was like when Jesus, you know the story, Jesus is dead on the cross, and during the time that he's in the grave, he visits Hades, is what Scripture tells us. He goes down there and he sets all the captives free. All these people that have been waiting, he sets them all free. And so he releases all the souls that have been being held captive. And so somebody sat down and this Gospel of Nicodemus writes a really gory version of what that experience must have been like. And it's a bestseller. It's kind of like The Exorcist was when I was in high school. Everybody suddenly understood all about the devil because Peter Blatty had put together this book about a little girl that, you know, jumps around in the bed and vomits up green stuff. And now we know all about the devil, you know? And so that was kind of what this idea was in the 5th century. And that set forth this idea that punishment is judicial now. The sins that we commit on earth now determine the nature of our punishment. And this comes into its fullest flower with Dante's Inferno, with Dante's Divine Comedy, right? Where you see there are 7 rungs of hell. And the farther down you go, the more brutal it is because these are the most brutal people. And you meet these historical characters who have done terrible, terrible things, right? It's also this is about 1,000 years of work that happens here. And then along, I don't know, it's about the 10th or 11th century, we begin to see the emergence of this idea of purgatory and indulgences. And what's ironic about this is purgatory is actually closer to what the early Christians believed hell to be, a place of transition, a place of purification, a place of kind of working your stuff out. And so what happened, though, was that the idea was, well, if my uncle's in purgatory, how do we get Uncle Phil out of purgatory? Well, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to pray him out. Well, I got to work all day. I can't pray him out. I got to work all day. And so that's how we got professional prayers. That's what monks and nuns originally began. They were the professional prayers. And you would go to them and give them money, and they would pray for Uncle Phil. And then it just became this big business, and that's how big cathedrals got built. And the best prayers had the biggest churches. And it just turned into this big business that was based on this idea that somebody was stuck in an afterlife situation that wasn't ideal, but you could get out. So now, where's and then, you know, you say, well, where's Scripture for this? Who knows? Where's scripture for any of this? Everybody's trying to figure this out. And we go back to what does Paul say? Eye hasn't seen, ear hasn't heard. It hasn't even entered into our minds what this stuff is. So we're just going to make some stuff up. That's really what it comes down to. Now, the Enlightenment comes along, though, and all of a sudden it's all about being individuals and being rational. And somehow or another, hell gets very simple. Now we're not all about rungs and all this, and you know, if you committed this sin, you get this punishment. Now everybody just goes to hell. That's the way that goes. It's very generalized. And the emphasis now, the rational way to explain the existence of hell is not that there's this big fiery pit that everybody lands in. We're out of Gehenna now. Now we're in, you can't be anywhere near God. God wants nothing to do with you. So you get into a really filthy doctrine of divine abandonment. And this is a scary doctrine. And I'm going to spend a minute on this. It's a big problem for me because that doctrine washes itself back up in the way that we treat people in our own communities. Have you ever heard anybody in a Christian circle think that somebody's beyond help? A lot of people will think that gay people have no chance. There's a whole doctrine of divine abandonment of gay people based on some text in Romans 1 where God, it says, just turn them over to corrupt minds. And they think this is about gay people. That's another subject for another time. It's about idol worshipers. But anyway, they're going to determine, they've decided this is about gay people, and that it says God turned them over to corrupt minds. So God's done with them. We don't owe them anything. And this idea of divine abandonment grows out of this concept that hell is really just being somewhere where God isn't. Now, the problem with that, of course, is it possible for there to be a place where God isn't? That's a big question. Mary?
If somebody loves you and you hate them, being in their presence is like hell.
Yes.
This is what somebody described to me one time. So if God loves me and I hate God and I have to be with God, it will be hell. So that in that way, God's there. You just don't like it.
There you go. I just don't know that is it possible to respond to the love of God by hating God? I'm not sure about that. But anyway, yeah, I guess it could be. This idea of abandonment gets ratcheted up once everybody crosses the ocean and we get into American revivalism. This is where we get Jonathan Edwards preaching sinners in the hands of an angry God. I was going to read some of it to you, but it's just more fun to read on your own. If you can get it, it's all over the web. This man, talk about scaring the hell out of people. That man did it with that sermon and set forth a whole kind of Christianity that didn't exist except in America, and then it washed back up into England, was this idea of revivalism, this idea that we are all sinners. Everybody's bad. We're all going to hell. We got to get ourselves right. And that's where evangelicalism becomes born. And that's how you get things like tract societies and missions. And when I was a kid, we would go pass out tracts on Saturday. We'd go stand on street corners and hand pamphlets out to people. And they were almost always about going to hell. I never understood why. And then our feelings would be hurt why people had thrown them on the ground. But they were always about going to hell. And that was supposed to scare people and wake them up. And so this was sort of how hell becomes more and more sort of as goes back to the stick, right? This is the stick, but we're not just going to use it on children. Now we're going to use it on everybody. We're going to put the fear of God's wrath into you, the fear of hell into you. And then we wonder why folks don't want to come running up into church. David Bentley Hart, who is a magnificent Christian philosopher, he teaches at Notre Dame. He wrote a book last year called That All Might Be Saved. And he kind of wants to correct some of this. And he says this: for the earliest Christians, the story of salvation was entirely one of rescue. All the way through, the epic of God descending into the depths of human estrangement to release his creatures from bondage to death. Remember, this is mortality, right? Penetrating even into the heart of Hades to set the captives free and recall his prodigal children and restore a broken creation. The first Christian's message was one of love and reconciliation and being brought out of hell, not being put into hell. And somehow or another, we lost that.
Hey, Tim, what is his denomination or tradition? This guy.
He teaches at Notre Dame, which of course is a Catholic school. He's Episcopal rooted. He was raised as an Episcopalian, but he spent most of his time studying and working in the Eastern Christian tradition, the Greek Orthodoxy. And what's very interesting is when I talk to my Orthodox friends and we talk about heaven and hell, they're like, yeah, we're not so wrapped up in that. We're not too concerned about that. And that's kind of where he draws from, is this idea that the revelation, the oneness with God, the spiritual experience of being aware of God's presence in the world far trumps, no pun intended, living in fear and being constantly worried about whether or not, you're going to get sent to the principal's office. There is this weird kind of infantile kind of idea that if I sin, and I was taught this. I was taught that if you lived a perfect life and just before you died, you looked up and they said, who took that? Who ate my Hershey bar? And it was you. And you said, well, it wasn't me. And you died and you went to sleep. You were going to go to hell because you had sinned. One sin was all it took. Living under that kind of pressure it's just no way to live. It's hard for me to reconcile that the one who made us and who has given us freedom and keeps calling us into a richer and deeper experience of love would want us to spend all of our time walking on eggshells against the fear of something that is never really fully defined in Scripture. And so this is where he's pushing us. And he's pushing us to realize that when the ancients thought of salvation, they weren't thinking about heaven and hell. They were thinking about their own circumstance. This idea that God had made God's presence known in the person of Jesus and had gone to the most extreme level possible to be in solidarity with us, even in an unrighteous death. And in that moment, still turn it into a rescue mission. Still find a way to bring us out of our fear of mortality, out of our fear of punishment, out of all of these things that a lot of Christians seem to think are necessary to understand what being a Christian's all about. I hope I'm making sense. Am I making sense? Okay.
Tim.
Yes.
Tim. So when you were talking about with like sin and how if there's like one sin is what would it take to go to hell, and also like how this you were talking about this like that, how we're all sinners. So I have this video game called Far Cry 5.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of the Far Cry series. And so this particular game is set in Montana. It's in the fictional Hope County. And the thing is, the whole county was overtaken by a doomsday cult.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the four generals, who was the younger brother of the main villain,
mm-hmm.
when John, so his whole shtick is like atoning for sin. They call him the Baptist. And
John the Baptist, good for him.
But he's one of the villains. But he's based on one of the villains. But here's the thing. So there's a few notable scenes where there's one part where he says, and he says in his message like how we're all sinners, every one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one cut scene in his region where he's baptizing a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the player character comes up, he's like, not this one. And I kid you not, he straight up grabs the player and forces him into the water, and brings him back up. And when he does it again, his older brother seems very displeased. And then at one point he says, "This one will reach the atonement." This gate to be the movie shut to you, John.
Wow, someone knows their theology there, huh?
And then after you take away, capture his home, there's this message on the phone where his older brother's like, "I've seen your death in a vision. You need to realize how much love is in your heart.
Oh, see? So that is so the redemption side of this, right? And it's really when we get lost in this idea that we are all so vulnerable and so fragile and so easily knocked out of the game, to borrow from Tony's example here, if we're too easy, how defeating that is. And yet some folks want to kind of hold that. Hey there, Hazel. So what happens is, this is what Bentley Hart is saying, is that we need to understand what salvation and what heaven and hell and all this, how this all kind of worked in the mind of Jesus and the apostles. Thank you, Tony, because that's really cool. When we understand the way it works, we see that this is really about something much more than whether or not you got your ticket punched, right? Let's go to the most famous text there is. Watch this. God so loved the world that God gave God's only Son, so that everyone who believes in God won't perish but have eternal life. God didn't send God's Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. So the promise here is not about condemnation. It's not about trying to get us all kind of in the who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. The language here is everyone and the world. It's big. It's big. It's bigger than just who's, and that's the challenge. I get these questions all the time, especially when I'm working away from home. I always wind up, with my teammates, and we always wind up at dinner, and somebody who hasn't sat by me at dinner somewhere along the line they'll scoot up, and they'll always have a few set questions. And one of the big questions is, but you're a Christian. Now, what about all the Hindus? Are they going to hell? And it's like, well, I'm going to tell you what. My text says God so loved the world. So I'm not worried about the Hindus. I'm not worried about them. God so loved the world. Everyone who believes. There you go. Everyone who has faith. I'm good with that. I'm not in, and I'm also not the bouncer. Okay, that's not my job to be the bouncer and decide who gets to come into the club and who doesn't get to come in the club. So I'm just going to take this in the way that it's, the way that it's intended, because the real story here is that this idea of salvation and rescue is really about escaping wrath. It's about escaping and overpowering death. It's about being free from any threats and dangers of destruction. That's the message of our faith. That is what our faith is all about. And if we get all wrapped up in what's going to happen the minute we close our eyes, and whether or not we're going to, have like in the movie Ghost, we're going to have all those little sparkles are going to go up in a fun way, or bad shadows are going to have, that's craziness. That's not what our faith is based on. There are plenty of texts that say this. I'm going to go to one of my favorites. There isn't any condemnation, Paul writes to the Romans, for those who are in Christ Jesus. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law of sin and death. This is about embracing your life. Later on in the chapter, he says, look, I'm convinced that nothing can separate us. Well, how do we manage that with the idea that we're going to be abandoned by God? Nothing can separate us from God's love in Christ Jesus our Lord. Not death, not life, not angels, not rulers, not present things, not future things, not powers, not height, nor depth, or anything that is created. There's nothing that can separate us from God. Peter says, Christ himself suffered on account of our sins. I love this, once for all. When Christ rose and said, I'm going to take this one, in solidarity with all of my brothers and my sisters and all of humanity, he did it once for all. All. The righteous one on behalf of the unrighteous. He did this in order to bring you into the presence of God. Christ was put to death as a human, but made alive by the Spirit. So this is always about rescue. Salvation, when folks tell you that they're saved, if you meet those folks, people say, have you been saved? It's like, yes, I've been rescued. Have you been rescued? I have been rescued. And I get rescued every day. That's really what this idea is about. Now, still, Jesus talked about heaven and hell. He sure enough did. And one of the big messages is always the story of the story of the goats and the sheep, right? They come forward, and there's a judge, and the judge says to the lovely lamb, says, you know, I was sick and you came to see about me, and I was hungry and you fed me, and you know, all of these, you did these wonderful things. I was in prison, all these things. And they're like, when do we do this? He's like, no, you did it for the least. You've done it unto me. And then there are the goats, and they're kind of like, they're the religious crowd. You know, they got this thing all figured out. And Jesus said, look, I was sick. You didn't show up. I was in prison. You just left me there. I was hungry, and you didn't, there were no casseroles at my door. And they say, when did we do this? And he goes, you didn't do it to the least. And then he says that what happens is the goats get separated from the lambs, and the goats go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous ones go into eternal life. Now, as I'm putting this lesson together, I'm hearing the people I grew up with who are raising all of these other texts to argue with the idea that God is a gracious God, and that, you know, these concerns that we have about heaven and hell are way overstated. And this would be one of the places that they go. So I said, well, let me do a little more homework with this idea of eternal punishment. Because first of all, if we believe in eternal punishment, that says something very interesting about God that's problematic, that God would just wash God's hands of us. Say, okay, I'm done with you. That doesn't feel right to me. So I decided I'd do just a little word thing, and I looked for, like, how long is eternity? Well, it turns out that this word that gets translated as eternal means age long. It does not mean, it's not a time thing. It doesn't mean forever and ever and ever and ever. It means it's more about the description of a quality, not a quantity of time. An age of punishment, just like an age of reason, an age of something else. There's a quality to this time, an age of life. And so what Jesus is actually saying is these folks get separated. They're going to have to have some fixing done. There's going to have to get some work done with them. And that's a different idea than the idea that they're thrown away and never thought about again. And I'm just going to go on the record here to say that I would have a struggle serving a God that would make me, and I would trust and maybe do well with, maybe not do well with, maybe ignore, and have a God that allegedly loved me, a God of infinite goodness and grace, all of a sudden run out of goodness and grace. That's a problem for me. I don't know if it is for the rest of you, but for me, it's a problem. And so when I think about these things, I have to say, I'm not sure. I don't have the answers. Eyes haven't seen. It's more than I can comprehend. We don't know. We just see through a glass dimly. But I'm going to take my cue from my ancestors and not get overly wrapped up in trying to predict who's in and who's out and how long this is and how bad it is, right? Because it raises a lot of questions when we start doing that. One of the ones that Bentley Hart asks that I love is, he asks, do we really believe in hell the way we were taught that hell is? Or do we believe that we have to believe in it? Do you hear the difference? Do we actually believe that hell exists the way that we were taught to be afraid of it, and that this was God just kicking us out the curb, saying, I'm done with you, I never want to see you again, go suffer for all of eternity? Or do we believe that we have to believe that or else? That's a question that we can only answer for ourselves. But and he goes on to say, if we did believe in an everlasting hell, could we ever have children? If we really believed hell was real, would we have children? Because what we would be doing would be bringing lives into the world that would face the very real possibility that they would have an eternity in torment. Would we ever stop from trying to evangelize the world? I know some people, they just want to take everybody to heaven with them, but they still go to sleep at night. So it's like, how does that work? Would we ever just seek contentment in this life? Or would we be so whipped out of shape about this idea that one day we could cross the line and we would go to hell? Would we ever be able to be content? Would it ever be good enough? Would our faith ever be good enough? Would we ever be able to satisfy what we think it would take to avoid hell? And then finally, would this disregard that we might have for others' fates ultimately jeopardize our own? What if I decided as a pastor to take the night off, and that was the night that somebody came that really needed that if I said the right words, they would no longer go to hell? And what if I was sitting at home watching Friends reruns instead? Could I ever do that? The challenge that he's trying to get us to think through, and I hope that you're sticking with me, is that the idea of hell may have captivated us more than our trust that it's an actual eventuality. We may be so wrapped up in the fear of hell that we believe in the fear of hell more than we believe in hell itself. Because the big question at the end is, how do we reconcile a loving, gracious, good God with any kind of eternal punishment scenario? That would mean that God ran out of love or patience or forgiveness. God ran out of something.
Tim,
yes.
I'm just thinking in that I have a friend, or I had a friend who was really kind of, and it's kind of weird in the UK, because he was really big on the idea of a rapture.
Yeah.
And rapture's not really that big a deal in the UK. But he was always kind of really worried that because I didn't kind of believe in a rapture but one day you're just going to get left behind.
That's a title for a great book. That sounds like a great book title, Left Behind. No, I'm kidding. Yes, there is that, right? There is that notion that any minute now could happen. Well, so I don't want to coarsen this conversation too much, but I will say this. You all know that by day I'm in marketing work, right? And marketing and advertising, there are sort of two ways of doing this. You either entice people to save all their money to buy a Mercedes-Benz because that's a wonderful status symbol and that's a luxury car. That's something you need to have. Or else you scare the daylights out of them. And I think of like those commercials. Most of the scary commercials are on during daytime. If you don't watch television in the day, you miss them all, because it's all about people who couldn't get they couldn't get the right lawyer, and they were in car wrecks and they couldn't get checks, and then also they waited too late to buy life insurance, or else it's all of the pharmaceutical ads, right? All of the, oh my goodness, I can't go outside in the sun because of my eczema, and I will never have a boyfriend, and all of these kinds of things, right? I don't want to trivialize anybody's pain, but what I'm saying is that these are sort of marketing ploys. They work really well in religion too. They work really, really well. I can tell you that if you get in this church and you just believe what I believe, you're going to prosper, you're going to go to heaven, everything's going to be hunky-dory, it's going to be wonderful. That's the Mercedes message. But I can also use the insurance message too. You better get yourself saved and you better live right, because any minute now, Jesus could come or you could die, and hell is a hot place. There ain't no water there. You see? And so they are very effective for manipulating people. But what they leave out of the equation is, where is God in all of this? This is why we get Hart saying the primary question is whether the God who creates a reality in which the eternal suffering of any being is possible, even if it should be self-induced. In other words, even if the person was just so evil that they deserve to go to hell, according to most people, this God can in fact be the infinitely good God of love that Christianity says God is. If there's a God that fixes it so that you can do something so awful that God wants nothing more to do with you, then how is that the God that we celebrate and we serve? Because this God is an unconditional loving God. This God is an infinitely gracious God. All this stuff we like to say about God, either God has to be that or God isn't that. And that's the challenge. Mary?
God didn't need a plan B.
Did not need a plan B. You're exactly right.
That's Richard Rohr saying.
The grace of God is the grace of God. And so if we're walking, And this is what leads me to one of my favorite passages. Those of you that have been around me know, and you've heard this. If we're walking around and we're afraid about hell and all of that, what we're missing is the love that is the nature of God, right? Dear friends, let's love each other because love is from God, and everyone who loves is born from God and knows God. There's no kind of just people that love. They're born from God and they know God. The person who doesn't love doesn't know God because God is love. Done. We've answered who God is. I'm sorry?
Sorry, but that's why I had a bit of a problem with our discussion of evil and saying that since everything emanates, from God and God creates everything, God created evil, and then, but why would God create evil? I mean, for the same reasons that we would say, why would we, worship a God that would doom God's creation to some horrible fire, pit of fire? But why would that same God create evil? So that's why I also had problems with.
No, that's a challenge, and it's a problem that we struggle to work that out, right? It is the idea, I think, is that if we go back to the story, right, the evil is in the tree. It pre-exists the human being. It's present before. And so I think that what God is saying is that there are choices that we're going to make. We're going to do things. But in the end, the forgiveness and the grace of God is greater than that evil anyway. And that's where we come back to this God of love, right? So maybe it's a way of drawing us out and in, right? I love in John, Jesus makes this statement. He's talking to some of his colleagues, other Jewish people, religious people. And at one point he just says, I'm going to have to he's telling them he's going to be put on a cross. And he says, if I'm lifted up, it says, I will draw all people to me. But the word there is actually, I'll drag them. It's like, I'm just going to bring them to me. I'm just going to go get them. And so maybe in this plan, and this is kind of where I run, this is above my pay grade. Your questions, I'm going to admit that. I don't have the answer for you here. But part of me sees that evil becomes instrumental in making us have to come back, right? Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I don't understand it myself. It's just the idea that when we try to understand evil as something that's a human creation, we get ourselves in trouble. Because evil is bigger than us. It gets us in ways, and it makes us do things that, like we've seen a lot of it lately, right? And so that's just kind of the struggle that we have. It's a problem. There's a wrinkle in the process here, I think. It doesn't help you, but I think that's the best I can give you, if that makes sense.
Can I try something, Tim?
Go, Bill. Yay.
Okay, it's just beautiful, and I thank you very much for your compassionate and earnest and informative history of really how the Bible and the Christian church has seen punishment versus reward in life. And I want you to see it in relationship, is what you're saying here, is I see it as you can't have one without the other. I mean, when you talk about hell, you also have to talk about heaven. I mean, that's the opposite. And so I'm big into opposites, as you know. And for me, what is so important is, for me, the most famous saying is, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Now therein lies the group. One of the struggles I think that you are having there about the temporal and the eternal. I mean, the whole New Testament is a sign of progression. It is always moving forward into the future. And it's always moving into the future of the kingdom of righteousness. The Messiah is coming for the Jews. I mean, but the Messiah has now come, and is here. and will continue in the future. So
Yeah.
you have to see heaven and hell in terms of the time, in terms of future. And it's not an ever-ending one. It's the fact that there is a new future that is possible because Christ has come to us, shared our common lot, and conquered sin and death. And so therefore we can move into a future with the freedom that you started with. We can move into that future, and moving into that future successfully and being free and just and merciful in our lives and in our social lives, that we are really ignoring all that, which is so eminently clear with our president. I mean, he truly, in one sense, has no understanding of an enduring future of love, and those who are more concerned for themselves, that are only concerned for their self-interest and their own salvation, that they can, and that they have the power, which you have eloquently suggested. It's a mystery, but they claim that they have the power as to who is going to dictate the future and who isn't going to dictate the future. So hell and heaven are more not punishment and reward, but it is whether or not you are fulfilling the purpose of God bringing in the kingdom, and how you are doing that.
Yes.
And well, but it was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Tim. I mean, so filled with specifics and earnestness.
This is a tough topic. I want to just get us to one last bit here on this verse which I live for, which is just this idea: there is no fear in love, right? But perfect love drives out fear, because why? Fear expects punishment. If we are living in terror of what happens after we die, we cannot perfect our love. We cannot be, to Bill's point, right? It is about us pushing ever toward a better future, a better world, a better life, a freer way of living. A freer way of living. The more you can let some of this stuff go, these sort of irrational fears, these fears that go back to get rid of the stick, just let it go. And know that you are made in the image and the likeness of a pure and loving and holy, gracious God. And if that's who you are made and modeled after, you have that capacity within you. And that changes your understanding. I just, I love that we're talking about, eternal dispositions and stuff like that. I just don't think about them that much. I just let's just go for it. Let's just be all that we can be and know what we can do and just live the best lives that we can. Because in the end, that will take care of itself. And one final thing, this is Shay and I were laughing about this. And what about heaven? Well, people have all these different ideas about heaven. For some, it's a life, the endless retirement golf vacation, right? That's what they think heaven is. And other people think it's just like Super Disney World. That's what it's going to be. And for others, it's just this great big sort of cloudy hangout spot with angels and harps and all of that. But I'm going to go back to the verse that I've been quoting all night long, right? We are confident because we know that while we are living in the body, we're away from our home with the Lord. We live by faith and not by sight. We're confident, and we would prefer to leave the body and be at home with the Lord. So our goal is to be acceptable, whether we are at home or away from home, just to live the life that we've been given, to live fully into who we have been made to be. That's who you are. God made you that way. Be all of that. Just be all of it. And you're going to find your way through all of this. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, we're going to go into our giving time. I promised you though that I was going to talk about here we go. What Gather is currently supporting a number of different projects, and I wanted to let you all know about that before we put up the giving sign. We are working with the Lighthouse Foundation, which is working to end racism in queer environments, working particularly to lift the lives of Black queer folks, Black trans folks, in all these different areas. And one of the things that I'm on the board of that group, and so we will support that by linkage of that. But we have also started a mutual aid fund to help Black queer folks as they're going through COVID. A lot of these people work in the service industry as waiters. They are hairdressers, they're entertainers. They have all lost their jobs. And so we have now, Gather has been putting some gifts toward this mutual aid fund and toward supporting the Lighthouse Foundation and their work in their ministry. We also are working with Reverend William S. Barber's Poor People's Campaign, and we are supporting them. We'll be doing more work with them, and you'll be hearing more events because I'm getting more deeply wound into the Illinois chapter of the Poor People's Campaign. The closer we get toward November, folks, you're going to be hearing a lot more from this group of folks. And finally, I don't know if he's still online or not. I kind of hope that he's gone off, but if he hasn't, that's okay. We're going to talk about our brother Shay. One of the things that we were talking about was Shay Watts was with me. Gather is the brainchild of the two of us. Shay is doing his doctoral work at Chicago Theological Seminary and has been just an invaluable part of this church and getting it started. And all of these Bible studies come after he and I spend hours working on developing curriculum and pulling all of these thoughts together and all of that. From his place in North Carolina, he reaches out, does a lot of work with a lot of different people, and has been really 100%. And I went to him after he taught us last time when he took a lesson. And I said, you know what, I think we want to do something special for you. Could we get you some books? And so we are now going to be spending a little bit of money supporting Shay and helping him with his education costs. I'm going to tell you something, as somebody who just went through seminary, the books are ridiculous. And so we are going to send, he sent us an Amazon list of about $200 worth of books. And so we're going to support Shay. And I want you all to know that you are part of that and helping him grow in his ministry. He has never said no to anything we've ever asked him to do. And so I wanted to make sure that we take good care of him as well. Amen. I hope you're all smiling about that.
Yes, he's still on, Tim, just so you know.
All right, Shay, we're talking about you.
And also the other thing, Jamie Frazier from the Lighthouse Foundation will be preaching Pilgrim Online on August 2nd.
Oh, well, there you go. So you all that are Pilgrimites, you'll get, he's my preacher buddy. So you'll enjoy Jamie. He will come in a fierce way, I promise you. So I wanted to tell you that to let you know, outside of just the usual expenses of keeping things going and websites running and, you know, all the things that go into keeping a church going and doing marketing and that kind of stuff and putting things up in here and there. We also do some special work in outreach so that, our gifts are not just sitting somewhere waiting for something to happen. So there you go. But if you haven't given lately and you feel moved, make sure that you use Zelle or Chase Quick Pay, gatheraop@gmail.com. I'm through with the pitch. I hate that part of it. You all know that. But anyway, there you go. Finally, remind you next week, new study series. Keep an eye out for your email for a new Zoom link. Shannon, make sure that I get your email so that I can make sure that you're in the email list. If I don't have your email, other folks, please get it to me. You can do it in the chat section here, or you can email me at gatheraop@gmail.com, and I'll make sure that you're on the list. Oh, any final thoughts? Any questions? Did this help anybody?
Tim.
Yes.
Like my mom was saying about, this concept of evil, like, why would God create evil in the first place? That's what I feel like Francis of Assisi must have thought in terms of animals, because, like, people say that he was fond of animals because of God's creation. I'm like, so, like, gray wolves are thought of as, like, the enemies of God's flock in the Bible. I mean, goats are somewhat, from what I've read, are associated with Satan, and also domestic pigs are sort of seen as abhorrent and not even raised as much in Israel. Like, as a missionary, as a priest, Francis had to have read the Bible and read about that. So I have to wonder if how could he think of even pigs as beings of God, creations of God, if the Bible says that they're abhorrent?
Well, I think that he was also, like a lot of us, understands that a lot of scriptures are written to particular situations that don't necessarily apply to everything, right? And I think that there's an ability for us to look beyond, especially legalistic kind of ideas like that. But it's an interesting idea. Any other final? Thank you, Tony. Any other final thoughts? I'm sorry, what?
One final. Oh,
yeah, Brian?
Yeah, I have one final thought, or at least a final thought from me. This was surprisingly helpful. For a while now, I have thought that the central issue of my life was that the God I understood as a child hated me because I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were going, through this discussion, I realized that there's another aspect to my religious upbringing, which is that, I was brought up Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that if you work hard enough, heaven cannot be denied you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a complete workaholic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much that I miss in life because I won't let go of my work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the sense that I'm going to go to hell if I don't work hard enough. But somehow that concept has just become so ingrained that it's difficult to dislodge and free myself from.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Good. There are entire books written on what's called the Protestant work ethic, right? Which is that you just work hard enough, and if you just do good enough, and what that does is it sort of takes grace out of the picture, right? It is breathe, just breathe, it'll be okay. This is God. God is full of grace and mercy and forgiveness. Mess it up, just mess it up, it'll be okay, you'll be all right. And when we get to that point, I'm not trying to tell everybody not to strive. I think striving is good, but at the same time, some folks will be so wrapped up in what they're doing that they lose touch with their being. And that's the challenge, right? And so, that's an interesting angle, Brian. Thank you. But and I know a lot of people that are just sure they're going to work their way into heaven. And
the other side of that, Tim, the other side of that work ethic is that it has validated the work hard, you make a lot of money. And if you make money, then you're good. And then you're as well as going to heaven because you're good because you made a lot of money. And the shame of the people who are making so much money and hiding behind that assumption that because they've earned it. It's terrible. This whole understanding of the Protestant role in developing the attitude of the work ethic in our society is what's crippling capitalism.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And what's the reverse of that? If you don't have money, then you're not working hard enough, right? You're not doing enough, and that extends, and that kind of mentality actually becomes very what's the word I want? It becomes pervasive, and it leaches off into other scenarios. I think I probably told you the story of a friend of mine who came to me crying because her sister-in-law had cancer, and she was the only non-evangelical in this group of sisters and sister-in-laws, and all the other sisters turned on the cancer patient and said, you better go to God because you're obviously sinning. Something is obviously wrong. The reason why you've got cancer is because you're not right with God. You better make yourself right with God. Where does that come from? You know, where does that come from? And so, but a lot of it comes from the things that Brian's talking about, that you're talking about, this idea of reward and punishment, and that it's all what we do. And we lose the fact that we are engaged and are beloved and are engaged with and encountering every day and beloved by a God of just such ridiculous goodness and grace that we can't even fathom it. And that is, go ahead, Brian.
I think part of the point is that each of us as individuals are not the center of the world.
Yes.
And what happens to us, what we contribute to the world, you know, does not hinge on us.
Mm-hmm.
We're peripheral to the central being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can recognize that, it's easier to understand, you know, the slings and arrows that we suffer,
mm-hmm.
as well as the blessings, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
sometimes the blessings are just windfalls. They're not, you know, they're not long fought, they're not the results of long fought victories, right?
Yeah.
They're just blessings that we
Yeah.
should be grateful for.
Yeah.
And sometimes the pitfalls are just, you know, stuff that happens in life. And I think that if we recognize that our lives are not central to our understanding of life,
mm-hmm.
in the broad context, it's easier to take a deep breath and say, you know, this is God's will, and that, you know, cancer isn't an indication of God's wrath.
Right.
For instance.
Well, I think it goes back to the text we were just looking at, right? You know, beloved, let's love one another. For love is of God, and everyone that loves is born of God and knows God, for God is love, right? So when you talk about being peripheral, I think it really means that I am connected to you. It's not a one-person show, you know? I am connected to every one of you, and I need to love you, and I need your love. And when we do this, we belong to a world. It keeps us in balance. It keeps us in balance and keeps us always understanding that we're moving towards something. We're going somewhere. Somehow or another, if we are all in this together, we can make things happen. I believe that.
The beautiful thing is that if we view ourselves as connected to a community,
mm-hmm.
then when one of us falls below the waterline, it's easier to raise them up.
Reach for them, right?
When someone is really going through a great time, they raise everyone else up.
Yeah.
It's not an individual circumstance. And that's one of the things that I think we've lost in our extremely individualistic
mm-hmm.
society, where, you know, everything's focused on individual responsibility. You know, you do this, you go to hell. You do X, you go to heaven. And if you have, you know, $100 billion, you deserve it.
Yeah.
No.
That's right.
Not quite. There's a network that's supporting us.
Mm-hmm.
And we, you know, I'm grateful for finding this small network of people who are supporting me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen. I think we could all say amen to that. Amen.
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 It's just good to be in this company and know that there is. Oh, this is a wonderful note to end on. So I'm not gonna spend too much. It's just wonderful to be in company with all of you, and to know the love that is here, and to know the goodness that is here. And I see, when I look at all your faces, I just see so much that's so much wonder. I'm just awestruck always. And so.
Can I add one thing, Tim?
Yes, sir.
I said, it's nice to be part of this small community that's supporting me. But the flip side of that is I'm proud to be part of this small community where I can support others.
Yes. Amen. Amen.
Oh, he brought forth a quote from me that the community has a vision is so important, and I think I want to end up, for myself anyhow, with the famous poet Tennyson, who said, "A man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for?"
That's
in other words,
beautiful. Yes. Yes.
That used to come to me a number of times when I needed motivation to go a little bit further. But it's having the vision and getting the vision clearer and clearer. And so a man's reach must exceed his grasp that he has. Oh, what's the heaven for? To move forward into the future with hope and love.
Always. Always moving forward. Always. Good night, you all. God bless you. Make sure you work with the service stuff. We got to have all that by next Wednesday. We'll see you for the new series next Thursday, and I'll be getting out emails by Monday with the new information. Whew. Okay, I don't want to mess up the moment. Let's just glow on our way. Amen.
Amen.
Good night.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody.
Good night.